the other spaces, the fear of people investing in themselves. Well, I think this concept of investing in ourselves, especially as women, is something that is just has not been done. As growing up in a predominantly patriarchal society, like we have as women have only been able to make money for the past 150 years, maybe. So the concept of actually us being worthy of investing in is a very novel concept that we, as the generations that are alive on this planet right now, need to be redefining for the future.
Warning, warning. As a medical doctor, I must inform you that there are side effects to this coaching session. Beware. It may enhance your self-esteem, cause you to experience vibrant health, encounter long-term weight loss, heal damaged relationships. Warning, there are side effects to this coaching session. It may increase your enthusiasm for life and bring about hope. It may cause you to have productive and optimistic thinking. It could even help you not allow messed up people to ruin the rest of your life, and help you realize the masterpiece that you are, and empower you to be the boss of your brain. Warning, these side effects may be long-term. This is Dr. Isabel from Doctoronamission.com.
Hello, Kimberly.
Hi, Isabel. It's so great to see you again, and
It's-
to greet someone from down under.
Yeah, and you were down under too. The last time I talked to you, you were, you had your little baby on your chest. And I was in my workout clothes and you were in your mommy clothes, and now we get to do this.
Yes, now we're all fancy and looking like the queens that we are. And, I always incorporate my kids into my business. They have been such a huge spark. And for me, like, I do my best to show up as professional as possible, but sometimes there are times where I have a baby asleep on me and I will do my best to pass it off. But sometimes if it's a pre-meeting, I'm more than happy to take it with someone who is also a mom who also understands that, we moms do what we got to do.
And do you realize, like, my mom is 97 years young, living independently in Washington, D.C., believe
Good
it or
for
not.
her.
I know, and still balancing her checkbook, for those of you who know what a checkbook is, to the penny. And I'm just like, Mom, you are rocking it. And so we as moms are like showing our kids
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
how it
I
can be
mean,
done.
it is ever since my son was born, I have always said that I am a warrior for possibility because he was when I was pregnant with him, we had a doctor that we called Doctor Always Wrong, and he kept on like saying, "Oh, well, you have placenta previa. I don't know if you're going to be able to give birth naturally, or oh, it's looking like your baby's going to be a 10.5 pound baby. Are you sure you want to give birth naturally?" I was like, "Yeah, uh-huh, yeah, uh-huh." So basically, it, like, proved him wrong consecutively. And then when my son came out, I was like, dude, we've been proving doctors wrong for life. So, since before you were born. So I just don't ascribe to
The negative.
the negative. I don't subscribe to it. I opt out, hit the unsubscribe button. Nope, the negative I am not available for. I'm available for solutions. I'm not,
Mhm.
I'm not going to stick my head in the sand like an ostrich and pretend like it doesn't exist, but I am going to say that, like, okay, when you experience something negative, that's when you have an opportunity to say, okay, now what can I do with this? Now, here's what the current present reality is. How do we shift this? How do we find a new solution? How does this allow us to innovate? How does this allow us to heal something within ourselves and then move from that space? Negative is only a data point. It's not something that necessarily needs to be dwelled on. And if you dwell on it, that's a choice.
And you'll get stuck. And I really love that idea. And I love the fact that, we as women have to have plan A, B, and C. I mean, just be able to pivot, and it's okay. You're not gonna freak out if one thing doesn't work. It's all
Yeah.
here and being the boss of our brains. Did you
Yeah.
lose me?
Yeah.
Did you lose me?
And it's, oh, no, it's that Australian Wi-Fi connection sometimes.
Now, I'm in New
I
Zealand,
had it when
right?
I was down under where I was like, he, they got about 20 years of catch up on the tech part, so in some areas to do.
Yeah,
In other areas they're like way ahead of leaps and bounds technologically wise, but
yeah,
it's
they are.
it was such a great experience living down there. It was literally living the vision and the dream, and what better time to do it than in a pandemic? I mean, come on.
I know. Hey, listen, before we jump into there, the listeners are listening. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. And just so you remember, I'm in New Zealand.
Yes.
Okay.
New Zealand,
Yeah.
a Kiwi, not an
Kiwi.
Aussie.
That's
I
right.
was in the Gold Coast. We were hoping to get over to New Zealand, but it just wasn't in the
No,
cards this trip, and that's okay.
no. Yeah. All right, here we go. Kimberly Spencer is a born and raised a Valley girl. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Valley girl is, that's a girl from California in America. And she's powered by green
The
juice.
Kardashians.
Yeah,
Where
powered by
the
green
Kardashians are from.
powered by green juice, Italian espresso, and gallons of glitter. And her husband calls her the honeybee because she buzzes around a lot. She is proud to have helped hundreds of leaders build their empire, break through their body barriers, revolutionize their relationships, and rewrite their stories of self-sabotage into a story of success in all areas of their life. I love it. Would you like to share a lot about your story, whatever you want to share, because it's an amazing, huge story.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't believe that success needs to be either linear, because in every experience, having coached leaders for 5 years now, I have not seen one like, here's my perfect plan of how everything is going to go. It's not linear, and it's not, and it does come with so many surprises. And it's also, I don't believe that your success in the way that I define success, which I believe should be completely different, or, however you choose to define success. My definition of success is not my success in my career or my business coming at the sake of my family or my health, because I had that. When I had an e-commerce business for a while, that was basically the catalyst when I went through a buyout, that was a catalyst for me going into creating Crown Yourself. And that business, I was burning myself out. I was waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, like panicked to respond to a customer email. I was having such anxiety. My hair was falling out. I'd gained weight. And after I went through the buyout process, which was its own stressors in and of itself, because I'd never dealt with lawyers in a professional atmosphere, and having all the beliefs that I thought I dealt with as a child and through like my early adulthood years of like being not enough, being, too much. That's all ego. It's like that pendulum swings. You're either not enough or you're way too much. And or being too feminine, too girly, too sparkly, too young, too, inexperienced, too, lack too little degrees, too few, too much education, too few. So I've going through that buyout experience was the first time that I'd ever had any of those fears or beliefs that I dealt with in my body and I dealt with in my relationships. And I'd figured them out for my body, and I'd healed myself from 10 years of a battle with bulimia, with
Mm.
no psychological or medical intervention. I figured it out with my relationships. I healed and got away from abusive, very troublesome relationships, and found the amazing man of my dream, another chef, and
Is
and
his name Manolo?
his name is Spike. Manolos are the shoes that I wear.
Oh, okay.
Manolos are the shoes that I love. But that cycle, I'd never experienced it in my business. In my career, I'd always been very audacious, very courageous with what I wanted. I always went for it. And suddenly all of these fears that I thought I dealt with in other areas were being brought to light by quote unquote professional men, who were older, more experienced, wealthier than I was as a 28-year-old, startup president of a startup. And I suddenly got so nervous and so beaten down by that experience that once I was bought out of that company, went off on my honeymoon. We literally signed the buyout agreement 3 weeks before I got married. And I went off on my honeymoon with my husband, and I was like, what do I do when I get back? And as, appropriate on a honeymoon for 6 weeks in Italy, we had some time to brainstorm, among other things. And
Yay.
yay!
Hey, can you just wait 1 second? The sun is beaming in. I'm just going to go close
Oh,
the
no
shades room.
worries. This is
Just
all
one
good.
second. Don't go away. Anyway, you're in Italy, you're brainstorming and doing the
Yep.
wild thing and enjoying life.
Way too many espressos, and my husband and I were looking at all of the past careers that I'd had. I'd been a Pilates instructor. I'd had a Pilates brick and mortar business for several years. I was a Pilates freelance instructor for over 12 years, which is what got me into my e-commerce business. I'd had the e-commerce business that we'd grown, and we'd gotten our product featured on Times Square. I got to pitch it to the first round of Shark Tank auditions. Like,
Wow.
I thought that that was going somewhere. And then I'd had the other pieces of my life, screenwriting, having a script produced and distributed by Lionsgate and on Netflix, and like all of these different pieces of things that I enjoyed, but I didn't quite know how to combine them into one holistic
Mhm.
picture. And I was
That
a
was
pageant
good
girl.
for you. That was
Well,
good
there was
for
that worked
you.
for me, yeah,
Yeah.
because every piece of it, like I loved having an e-commerce business, but I didn't love certain parts of it. Like I didn't, and I couldn't really peg my finger on what it was that I didn't love about it. But now I know it was because my partner and I were very misaligned on values. Not that his were bad or mine were bad, or his were good and mine were good. It was just it was just a relational misalignment, and that's what I work with many of my clients with now, and like looking at their core customer, their core values for their company. And so it served me really well. I just, back then, I was floundering with complete lack of clarity.
Mhm.
And so I had way too many espressos, and I leaped off the couch and I said, "Crown yourself." And my husband's like, "What's that?" And I said, "That's the name of my company." And he's like, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I think it's like a blog, maybe something like Marie Forleo, maybe like an online course or something." I just had no clarity, but I immediately went into action for a year and a half doing what I lovingly call productive procrastination, which is where you work on all the parts of the business, the lovely things like a logo design and a website design and getting a YouTube channel and posting on social media. But for a year and a half, I made no money because I was focusing on productive procrastination and wasn't actually focusing on driving what drives a business, which is revenue and customer impact. And I believe, and I tell all my clients now who I work with when they're entrepreneurs, is people only value so much what they get for free. Like we've all heard it said, like having the freemium things are great. The premium, freemium of the front of the funnel things, like the podcast and things that where people get to consume, they get to impact, they get to feel your value. But then there were all those other pieces that I was giving away or wasn't charging or wasn't even valuing in myself, that I couldn't see until I found out that I was pregnant. And then when I found out I was pregnant, that changed everything for me, because I knew that the person that I had become over that year and a half of doing tons of things, always being busy. My husband had a joke for those years that I couldn't literally get through a Netflix show within 15 minutes. I would have my laptop open. I don't know what I was doing, like, because now I'm able to watch a episode or so of TV, have a glass of wine. My computer is off, and the business is doing far better than it ever was with me working at that pace. But it was only because I was confusing busyness with purpose. And once I found out,
Absolutely. I hear that. I so get that. Yeah.
yeah,
And like
once I,
if we're busy, it's sexy to be busy, but really, are you being productive? People always say to me, are you busy?" And I go, "You know what? No, I'm being productive." And they're like, "What?" So you have to explain that whole.
yeah, it's a massive paradigm shift because our society really values busyness.
Mm,
And so many people are busy, but they're lacking purpose. They're lacking intentionality. They're
yeah.
lacking that underlying meaning of, like, what is it that I'm so busy doing? And that's how you get people in a career for 10, 20 years, and suddenly they're, midlife crisis. Suddenly they're like, they don't want to be in that business. They realize they've built their own prison. And I've
Yeah.
never, ever wanted to put myself in that role. And when I realized that after a year and a half I knew I had to escape my own dungeon of doubt and start believing in myself and essentially crown myself to be the leader, the female example for my son.
And start charging for your services,
Amen.
because that's
Yes.
what happened with the pregnancy with you, right? You were like, I have something valuable inside of me. People need to invest in themselves because I can
Yes.
help them. I so get that. And what
Yes.
is it about people? They just have ah, such a hard time investing in themselves.
I think it's I think it's a twofold streak. There's a lot of new entrepreneurs who come onto the scene who they themselves have trouble charging for their products and services. And I notice I didn't say charging for what you're worth because I'm like, you are not a hooker. You are you are priceless. There is no price that you can be bought for, ideally. But your products and services, the knowledge that you have acquired, the skill set that you have built over the years of lifetime, the different fields that you've been in, the education that you've received from the school of life or actual schools or certifications or whatnot, that has a price tag attached to it. When you package it up into a process, that is something that you can sell. And that is something that is worth if what you sell, then if you sell that process and then that process delivers results, like my clients make heaps more more than they've invested. I had one of my clients, he joked with me. He said, "If I'm able to buy my plane after this year working with you, I will know that this investment was worth it."
Mm.
And after I said, "Great, challenge accepted." Within a year, he became the number one business in his industry in the UK and bought his plane and fulfilled that childhood dream. And that was more fulfilling for me was that it wasn't about the plane. It was about the fact that he got to fulfill a childhood dream.
Mhm.
Like one of my clients was able to find her life purpose, really shifted her business to actually working in another one of my clients' businesses. And then she reconnected with her estranged children, and her estranged children one of her children started to work with her, and so she started to redevelop that bond. That was more important to me than anything. Like, so the value that you can get from investing in yourself is priceless, but that is if you have a proven process that actually produces
Works.
results. And if
Yeah,
you
that
don't have a
works.
proven process, then test it out for a low price, see what could work, play with it. Don't stay in the playing and research phase too long. But the research comes from actually doing it. I did not used to charge what I charge now for coaching. Like I started out just charging, I would charge $2,000 for 8 sessions. Now it's very different. But that was the space in which I would start. And you
Mhm.
have to have a starting point. And it's from that space. So that's one piece of the puzzle, and then the other space is the fear of people investing in themselves. Well, I think this concept of investing in ourselves, especially as women, is something that is just has not been done. As growing up in a predominantly patriarchal society, like we have as women have only been able to make money for the past 150 years maybe.
Mm.
So the concept of actually us being worthy of investing in is a very novel concept that we, as the generations that are alive on this planet right now, need to be redefining for the future.
Mhm. I agree with you. I agree with you. Women need to learn to invest in themselves because all we know is to give, 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 give. And if we're not giving, then we're being selfish.
Yeah.
If we're taking, I wanted to ask you, you said here the stories we tell ourselves are the most profound and usually not true. What like you said here in my story, you were saying you were never enough. Can you talk to us about how you started to change the story you said to yourself? Like, you're
Yeah.
not perfect enough, you're not smart enough.
Yeah, so I grew up in a home with an addict. My dad was an addict and my mom was a codependent. And being in that environment, I saw my dad was a very high functioning addict. Like saw him over 30 years go from nothing and broke to building a $1 million business, $1 million a year business. But that being said, it was still the addiction was an issue. And I always thought, well, maybe if I was perfect enough, maybe if I was skinny enough, maybe if I got good enough grades, maybe I and so that programming was very much built in as a child. And then because of different abuses that I went through as a child because of my dad's alcoholism specifically, it wasn't the other addictions that he had were never an issue, but when he was on alcohol, he was incredibly abusive.
Mm.
And it was when that programming from those experiences growing up, that really made me buy into this mentality that I was broken, that I was damaged, that I was a victim, and that I would never be enough. And that was a mindset that I took into my relationship with my body for 10 years with bulimia. I believe that I was broken. I believe that I deserved to be punished, that I deserved to like hurt my body. I had all these beliefs and stories, and I thought that they were true because they were defining my identity of who I was at the time. And it wasn't until I removed myself from the environment of my parents' home and started actually teaching Pilates and doing what I loved, which was back then pursuing a career in entertainment simultaneously, um, that I was able to see how these stories that I was telling myself, that some of them were chosen because I started exposing myself as a Pilates instructor. I was teaching 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, when 6 hours on a Saturday. So I was exposing myself to at least 50 different belief systems on a regular basis. That's why I so encourage people to listen to podcasts, to hear different interviews, to just shake the frame of the perspectives of what you believe is possible.
Mhm.
And what I saw was because I was being exposed to all these different belief systems and all these different realities or perceptions of realities, I saw that, wow, what is that person doing? It allowed me to get curious of like, I like how that person has a wonderful, amazing, happy, fulfilling marriage and she's doing great and her like family's super wealthy. Like, I want to know what she's doing. And like, I had another client who I thought she would always come in super happy. She was a lawyer at one of the top law firms in the world. And she would always walk in at 9 o'clock, like pregnant. She had two kids. And I was like, whatever you're doing, I want to know what you're
I
doing.
know.
And
Yeah.
and she said, and I thought, have you always had a perfect life? Have you always, and she explained, shared her story with me once, and I was like shocked because I was like, it was the same reality that I grew up with, but her belief system was so different than where mine was. And I thought, well, if she believes something different, then maybe I could believe something different too. Because so often we're conditioned to believe the identities and the beliefs that we grew up with. My dad, I love him. I miss him. He recently died last year. He also had a belief that he was broken, damaged, and would never be enough. And that's where his addictions stemmed from.
Mm.
And those beliefs I adopted and I inherited. But just because you inherit it doesn't mean you have to keep it.
Mm-mm.
And when I shifted my belief system over time, it took a couple of years, but I started questioning my habits, my thoughts, reactionary trigger feelings. I started allowing myself to look at those shadowy parts of myself that it's not a fun conversation initially to
Oh, it's
have,
a
the ownership conversation.
you have to be very bold and courageous to do that hard work. That is deep, hard work. So
It is.
I applaud you for doing that work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, anybody who's on that journey of finding of creating and rebuilding that relationship with yourself and learning how to love yourself and find that self-worth, that is one of the most valuable and challenging journeys that you are ever to go on. And it will be so rewarding when you realize it. Like when you come, like it is just a game changer. And when I realized that everything in my life, every experience that I had, every everything I went through was happening for me instead of to me,
Mm.
that perspective changed everything.
Mhm.
Because when I saw that, because I was able to assess human behavior, because children of addicts and alcoholics are able to, just from a survival standpoint, we're able to look and like see very quickly what somebody's behavior
Well,
is
you got
just,
antennas. Your
yeah,
antennas are
it's like a
constantly
spidey
out.
sense.
Yeah.
Like you, and because you know that in certain situations you may have to adapt your behavior to survive. Well, I
That's
learned,
right.
and not that I ever felt like my life was threatened as a child, um, but that's how you adapt in order to survive against those fear-based feelings. And so that skill set served me so well as a Pilates instructor. It served me in sales in my e-commerce company. It served me now as a coach because I'm able to see like, oh my gosh, my client is just about to be on the verge of a breakthrough, and it's intuitive. It's
Hmm.
so intuitive because it's something I grew up with, that I was trained with, and I would never have that training had it not been for the experiences that I had as a child. And so I am so grateful for my upbringing. I'm so grateful for every bit of it because it trained me in ways that standardized education could never prepare me for.
Mm-mm.
The school of experience and hard knocks. Every time I ask any one of my clients, how where have you learned the most, they always say experience.
Yeah.
And it comes down from that experience of looking at things through the lens. And this is my favorite question to ask any of my clients, no matter what their experience is. And it's a hard one to digest, especially if you're in the midst of some traumas. But how is this the best thing that could have ever happened to you?
Great question. Great
And
question.
when you look at that things from that perspective, it shifts
Hmm.
radically. Like, because of certain experiences I grew up with as a child, I've been able to literally save lives. I was able to notice somebody from across a room and 2,000 people, help him have a breakthrough to admit his own experiences with sexual abuse. I didn't realize that that night he was planning to kill himself. And he says now, 3 years later, he's like, Kim, you saved my life. Like, I don't think you realize that that moment that was transformative. Had I not had my spidey senses that I got because of my growing up,
Hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to do that. I wouldn't have
That's
been able
right.
to have that.
That's
And
right.
so it's a blessing what I went through.
It is a
And
blessing.
being able to look at everything from that perspective. So when and it takes a while, because so often initially our initial response is like, screw you, this is like the worst thing that ever happened. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to look at this. But when you actually allow that inner child to be seen, that hurt part of you to be seen, and say, yes, I understand that what you went through sucked. That does not, just because you were a victim of an abuse, an experience that was unjust, not fair, you didn't deserve it,
Mm.
doesn't mean that you have to have a victim mindset.
That's
And when
right.
I freed myself from having that victim mindset
Mm.
and started taking radical ownership of everything in my life, it changed the game, and it changed for how I showed up as a parent. It changed the game for how I showed up as a wife with my husband.
And
It
it's going to
changed how I
change
showed up for my
generations.
business.
Yeah, it's going
Yeah.
to change your future generations. Thank you for sharing that. I get you, girl, loud and clear. Now, before we land this plane, because everybody's, flying in first class here, can you tell our listeners, can you share with our listeners 3 action steps that they could take, so that they can start winning right away? I mean, I could say one right away from what you just said is,
Ooh, what would you say? I'm curious.
don't look at something that's happened to you, think something has happened for you.
Mhm.
How can you make this a positive? Because that's the sign of a successful person creating their brand new story.
Yeah, you get to create your own reality when you shift that perspective.
Yeah.
So first I would say, actually, just be the gentle observer of everything. The observer of your thoughts, the observer of your feelings, the observer of your triggers. Allow yourself throughout the day to be almost put on the anthropologist hat. An anthropologist isn't looking at a society or a person through the lens of judgment. And so often when we are looking, like we can have that lens of shame or guilt, or anger or fear cloud the actual experience. Like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking this, or oh, I know better. Well, you are in a learning process. So it is a process. So allow yourself to have the grace to say, I wonder what triggered that. I
Hmm.
wonder, that's an interesting response. That's always my favorite response is, huh, that's interesting. that's interesting why I'm so like feel so emotional toward that person, or that's interesting why I'm feeling jealousy, or that's interesting why I'm suddenly thinking that I can't do it, or that's interesting
Yeah.
why like anytime that's interesting why this debt collector like shows up at my door, like that's interesting that like that's interesting that this happened, or that's interesting that my bank account is overdrafting, like whatever it is, that just say, huh, that's interesting. What triggered that? Because when you're looking at it, instead of looking at it from the reactive perspective, you're able to look at it and in hindsight, and hindsight's not 2020, hindsight's like way clearer. But if you look at hindsight with through the lens of judgment and shame, it's going to cloud the perspective. Versus if you look at it through the perspective of, huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What led to that? Like what were the pieces that led to that experience? Oh, it was because I was feeling emotional. Oh, it was because I was feeling like I wasn't feeling heard in my own story. Oh, it's because I'm not feeling seen in my own relationship. Oh, it's because I forgot to pay that bill. Oh, it's because I wasn't being diligent with my finances. So it's being able to look at it from a place of, oh, what's that thing that I can learn from it? Then looking at how is that for you? Well, if you've overdrafted on your account, how is that for you? Well, it teaches you diligence to be responsible with your money. Maybe that means setting up a weekly thing where you get to look at your bank account and have a relationship with what's going on with your money. Like money's just a form of energy. Maybe
Right.
it's, oh, I gained 5 pounds. What that's interesting. What caused that? Oh, it was probably because I was a little PMSy. I was having some more ice cream than normal. And oh, okay, I might want to go to the gym. Okay, great. Awesome. So how did this happen for you? It gave you what habit could it help you develop? What skill set could it help you develop? Could it help you become more responsible, more courageous, more in integrity with what you preach, more aligned, more purposeful, more intentional? Like all of these are qualities of who you're creating yourself to be and the new story that you're crafting for yourself. So what is and so once you look at that's interesting, get curious of how is this happening for you, then look at who is this creating you to be. If that lesson is for you, if that thing is for you, like for me, my experience as a child, I looked at them as being for me being of service, me being able to share my story, to be of service, to hopefully illuminate some pieces so that people won't feel so ashamed of experiences that they've been through as a kid, hopefully to inspire them, to give them perspective. Like I look at that as being for me so that I could be of service. I also look at it of being for me so I could be courageous. It takes a lot of guts to stand up in front of a TED talk and allude to, I didn't state out flat out, but allude to being molested as a child. Like that takes a lot of guts, and it made me be courageous. And being able to look at who is this creating me to be? Is that something that I want to become? Do I want to become more courageous, more responsible, more decisive? These are all qualities of incredibly successful people. So if we can cultivate those qualities of being, when we focus on changing our identity rather than our habits, that's how we change everything.
Exactly. I love it. Thank you so much.
You
So
are so welcome.
so number one is say, that's interesting. Number two is be curious. And three is how is this for you?
Yeah.
I
Well,
love it.
2 is how is this for you, and 3 is who is that creating you to be?
Okay, good. I
Yeah.
love that. Who is that creating you to be? And then how can people get in contact with you?
If you liked what I had to say, then just head on over to crownyourself.com and click the button that says work with me, and I would love to have a conversation one-on-one with you.
I love it. And that will be in the show notes, I promise.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thanks for being so real.
Of course.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. And thanks for being so brave.
Thank you so much. Thank
You're-
you for being so brave and doing what you do.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit,
Yeah.
huh? And I would definitely like to have you back because there's, like I had a lot of other questions I wanted to ask, but I'm very respectful of people's time because, I think about a half an hour is about tip top for people to listen,
It depends. People listen to Joe Rogan's podcast for 3 hours, so we could just keep going and just test the
3
waters.
hours. Really? I've never ever done that.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, well. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank
Absolutely,
you
Dr. Isabel.
everyone for thank
Oh,
you. And thank you everyone for joining us here at the MD and Chef team. You know what? I love that you're here. I love that you're listening. Let me know how this is helping you. Send us a message. Let us know. We want to know how this has served you. And before we go, please always know to remain unstoppable and just chase down that new life that you want to be. You know, I always say you've got a canvas that you wake up with every morning and you've got the paintbrush. How are you going to paint your life? You've just gotten some great advice from Kimberly on how you are in control of that. She's just given you 3 takeaway action steps to help you begin doing that. And I hope that you will incorporate that into your life. Okay. All right. That's it from me. And that's it from Kimberly. Thank you for your time. Talk to you
thank you
later.
so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.